On the morning of March 17, 1865, in Warren County, Mississippi, something unprecedented happened at Magnolia Springs Plantation. Delilah, a 34-year-old enslaved woman who had spent 19 years serving the most vicious mistress in the Delta, walked into the big house, not as a servant, but as its new master. By noon, Constance Whitfield, the plantation mistress who had burned, beaten, and tormented dozens of enslaved women, was picking cotton in the fields with bare feet and bleeding hands. By sunset, the overseers were taking orders from a black woman. For 17 days, the entire social order of the plantation was turned upside down. But this revolution didn't begin with violence. It began with something far more dangerous: intelligence, patience, and perfect timing. But to understand how a woman born into chains came to sit in the mistress's chair, wearing her silk dresses and commanding her former oppressors, we must go back 6 months earlier, to September of 1864, when Delilah was still invisible, still silent, still waiting for her moment. Magnolia Springs Plantation sprawled across 2,300 acres of prime Mississippi Delta land, 15 miles south of Vicksburg. The plantation produced 40,000 pounds of cotton annually, worked by 117 enslaved people. The big house stood at the center like a white monument to wealth built on stolen labor, with 6 massive columns, wraparound porches, and windows that gleamed in the sun. Behind it, the slave quarters stretched in 2 long rows, rough wooden cabins that housed 4 to 6 people each, with dirt floors and roofs that leaked when it rained. The plantation belonged to Nathaniel Whitfield, a man of 53 years who spent most of his time in Vicksburg conducting business, playing cards, and visiting his mistress, a free woman of color who lived in a cottage on the edge of town. His frequent absences meant the plantation was effectively run by 2 people: Marcus Drummond, the overseer, a brutal man of 40 years who believed enslaved people were animals to be broken, and Constance Whitfield, Nathaniel's wife, who ruled the domestic sphere with cruelty that would make her husband's overseer seem merciful by comparison. By September of 1864, the war had been raging for 3 years. Vicksburg had fallen to Union forces in July of 1863, and the Confederacy was dying, though men like Nathaniel Whitfield refused to admit it. The plantation continued operations, though with increasing difficulty. Enslaved men were being conscripted to dig trenches for the Confederate Army. Food was scarce, supplies were expensive, and everyone, both black and white, could feel that change was coming. The question was what form that change would take. Delilah had been born on a smaller plantation in Natchez, Mississippi, in 1831. Her mother had been a field hand, her father unknown, though whispered to be the plantation owner's younger brother. She had been sold away from her mother at age 15, a common practice designed to break family bonds and prevent unity among the enslaved. She arrived at Magnolia Springs in 1846, purchased specifically to serve as lady's maid to the new Mrs. Whitfield, who was 22 years old and fresh from Charleston, South Carolina, with refined tastes and a temperament that would prove to be absolutely vicious. Delilah was small in stature, barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with dark skin, observant eyes, and hands that had learned to move silently through rooms. She had a photographic memory that allowed her to recall every conversation she overheard, every routine she observed, every weakness she noticed. She was literate, having been taught secretly by an elderly enslaved man who had learned from a sympathetic white child before the laws against slave literacy became harsh. She kept this skill hidden, knowing that literacy was both power and danger. For 19 years, Delilah had served Constance Whitfield directly. She dressed her each morning, styled her hair, attended her during social calls, and undressed her each night. She knew every dress in the wardrobe, every piece of jewelry, every secret, every fear, every habit. She knew that Constance drank laudanum before bed to sleep. She knew that Constance was terrified of thunder. She knew that Constance had lost 3 babies in childbirth and blamed enslaved midwives for the losses. She knew that Constance hated her husband and took out her frustrations on the women she owned. But most importantly, Delilah knew that Constance was cruel in ways that went beyond the standard cruelties of slavery. She collected methods of torture the way other women collected china patterns. She had a flat iron that she would heat until it glowed red, then press against the skin of enslaved women who displeased her. She had a collection of thin canes that left welts without breaking skin, maximizing pain while minimizing visible damage. She had perfected the art of punishment that left psychological scars deeper than physical ones. Delilah had survived 19 years by becoming invisible. She had learned to anticipate Constance's needs before they were spoken. She had learned to absorb insults without flinching. She had learned to watch without seeming to watch, to listen without seeming to listen, to remember everything while appearing to know nothing. She had also built relationships with every other enslaved person on the plantation. She was trusted by the field hands, respected by the house servants, and loved by the children who saw her as an auntie who would sneak them extra food when possible. She knew the gossip from the quarters. She knew who was strong, who was weak, who was brave, who could be counted on. She had spent 19 years building a network without realizing that one day she might need to use it. Delilah had managed to maintain one precious thing through all the years of slavery: a relationship with Solomon, a man 6 years her senior who worked as the plantation's head carpenter. They had married in the slave tradition, jumping the broom in 1851. Though the union had no legal standing and could be dissolved at the master's whim at any moment. They had no children, and Delilah privately thanked God for this mercy, knowing she could not bear to see her own children sold away or beaten or destroyed by the system that owned them all. Solomon was intelligent, skilled, and strong. He built the furniture for the big house, repaired structures across the plantation, and was valuable enough that Nathaniel Whitfield allowed him certain small privileges. He was permitted to keep a tiny portion of money when he was hired out to neighboring plantations. He was allowed to maintain a small workshop. He was, by the standards of slavery, fortunate. But both he and Delilah knew that fortune meant nothing when you owned nothing, not even yourself. On Sundays, when work ended early, Delilah and Solomon would sit together outside their cabin in the quarters, speaking in low voices about impossible dreams. Freedom, the North, Canada. They would sing spirituals that carried coded messages about the Underground Railroad. Wade in the water meant use the river to hide your scent from the bloodhounds. Follow the drinking gourd meant follow the North Star to freedom. They had never attempted escape because they knew the odds. Bloodhounds, slave patrols, the Fugitive Slave Act that meant even reaching the North wasn't safety. But they dreamed, and dreaming kept them human. The other person who mattered deeply to Delilah was Esther, an elderly woman of 68 years who had been born in Africa and survived the Middle Passage as a child. Esther was the plantation's herb woman and unofficial spiritual leader among the enslaved population. She practiced hoodoo, the African spiritual tradition that had survived and adapted in America, mixing Christian prayers with African rituals, using roots and herbs for both healing and protection. Esther had taught Delilah much over the years: which plants could heal, which could harm, which could kill. She had taught her that survival wasn't just physical, but spiritual, that the ancestors watched over them, that justice would come in this world or the next. Esther had also taught Delilah something else: patience. Rushing breaks the clay pot, she would say in her thick Gullah accent, mixing English with African words. Wait for the right moment. The hunter who moves too soon scares the prey. The hunter who waits catches everything. Delilah had waited 19 years. She was about to discover that her moment was approaching. Constance Whitfield was 43 years old in September of 1864, though she would tell visitors she was 38. She had been beautiful once, or so Delilah had heard from enslaved people who had served her when she first arrived. 2 decades of disappointment, laudanum, and suppressed rage had carved lines into her face and hardened her eyes. She wore her brown hair in elaborate styles that took Delilah an hour each morning to perfect. She dressed in the finest fabrics that could still be acquired despite the war: silks, satins, imported laces. She maintained the appearance of Southern aristocracy even as the Confederacy crumbled around her. Her cruelty had multiple sources. She resented her husband's neglect and his obvious mistress in Vicksburg. She mourned the children she had lost. She was terrified of losing her social position. She was addicted to laudanum. She was trapped in a marriage and a society that gave her power over enslaved people, but no power over her own life. None of this excused her actions, but it explained them. Constance took out her powerlessness on the only people more powerless than herself, the enslaved women who served her. Her favorite victim was Delilah, perhaps because Delilah was closest, perhaps because Delilah never showed emotion, perhaps because some cruel instinct told Constance that beneath Delilah's submissive exterior was the intelligence that threatened her. Constance found reasons to punish Delilah at least once a week. A dress not hung properly, hair styled wrong, moving too slowly, moving too quickly, speaking without being spoken to, not anticipating a need quickly enough. The punishments varied. Sometimes it was the flat iron, pressed against Delilah's arm or shoulder, leaving burns that would scar. Sometimes it was the cane, delivered across the back or legs. Sometimes it was psychological, forcing Delilah to stand in the corner of the bedroom for hours while Constance slept, or making her watch while other enslaved women were beaten, knowing that Delilah cared about them and felt guilt that she was spared while they suffered. But Constance's cruelty extended beyond Delilah. She had a house girl named Lily, whipped for breaking a teacup. 20 lashes that left the 16-year-old girl's back striped with scars. She had a cook named Ruth, locked in the root cellar for 2 days without food or water for overcooking a roast. She had a laundress named Sarah branded on the shoulder with an iron when she lost a pillowcase, marking her as a thief, even though the pillowcase was later found in Constance's own closet. The enslaved community at Magnolia Springs lived in constant fear of Constance's moods. If she woke in a bad temper, someone would suffer before breakfast. If she received a disappointing letter, someone would pay. If she drank too much sherry at dinner, someone would be dragged from their cabin in the middle of the night for some imagined offense. The field hands feared Marcus Drummond, the overseer. The house slaves feared Constance Whitfield, and many believed that Constance was worse because her cruelty was personal, intimate, deliberate. Nathaniel Whitfield rarely intervened. He considered the management of house slaves to be his wife's domain. As long as the enslaved people continued working and the plantation continued producing, he didn't concern himself with his wife's methods. Besides, he was gone most of the time, preferring Vicksburg to the isolation of the plantation. He would return every few weeks, review the account books with Marcus Drummond, spend a night or two in the big house, then leave again. He was a man who owned human beings the way he owned land and livestock, as investments to be managed for maximum profit. Marcus Drummond was a different kind of monster. He was a large man, 40 years old, with hands scarred from violence and a face that had been broken in multiple fights. He had grown up poor white trash in Alabama and had clawed his way up to the position of overseer through brutality and a willingness to do things that even other overseers found excessive. He believed that enslaved people were animals, and he treated them accordingly. He carried a bullwhip that he used frequently, aiming for faces when he wanted to make an example, backs when he wanted to inflict maximum pain without leaving immediately visible damage. He had killed 3 enslaved men over the years through beatings, and Nathaniel Whitfield had covered up each death to avoid losing valuable property to investigation. But Marcus Drummond had a weakness. He was predictable. He had a routine. He woke at 5 o'clock every morning and rode out to the fields. He returned to his cabin on the edge of the quarters at noon for a meal. He spent afternoons patrolling or dealing with discipline issues. He returned to his cabin at sundown, ate dinner, drank half a bottle of whiskey, and passed out by 9 o'clock. Every single day, the same pattern. Delilah, who heard everything through the network of enslaved people who moved between big house and fields, knew his schedule perfectly. There were others in the hierarchy of oppression. James, an enslaved man of 35 years who served as driver, meaning he supervised other enslaved workers in the fields and enforced discipline on behalf of Marcus Drummond. James was hated by many in the quarters because he would whip his own people to maintain his position. He justified it by saying he whipped less hard than Marcus would, that he was protecting them by taking the job himself. Some understood this logic. Others called him traitor. Delilah understood that James was simply trying to survive in the only way available to him, but she also knew that when change came, James would face consequences from his own people. There was also Miss Martha, Constance's elderly aunt, who lived in the big house. She was 71 years old, bedridden with arthritis and consumption, requiring constant care from enslaved women who attended to her needs. She was less cruel than her niece, sometimes even kind, slipping extra food to the women who cared for her. But she benefited from the system, lived in comfort created by stolen labor, and never once questioned whether owning people was right. Her kindness was the kindness of someone who believed herself generous while participating in evil. This was the world Delilah inhabited in September of 1864. A plantation where cruelty flowed downhill from master to mistress, to overseer to driver. Where 117 human beings owned nothing and existed solely to make white people wealthy. Where any resistance meant death or torture so severe that death would be preferable. But the war was changing things. Everyone could feel it. The Confederate dollar was worthless. Union troops controlled the Mississippi River. Enslaved men were running away to Union lines and not being returned. White men were dying in battles with names that echoed through the South: Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Shiloh, Atlanta. The world that had existed for 2.5 centuries was dying. Something new was being born, and Delilah was beginning to realize that if she was patient, if she was smart, if she waited for exactly the right moment, she might survive to see it. Are you feeling the weight of these 19 years yet? Can you imagine serving someone who tortured you daily, maintaining a mask of submission while your mind burned with everything you couldn't say? This is the America that textbooks sanitize. This is the reality of slavery, not just labor but psychological warfare, not just physical chains, but the daily crushing of the human spirit. Remember this as the story unfolds. For now, in September of 1864, Delilah was still the invisible servant. Still the woman who dressed Constance each morning and undressed her each night. Still the woman who absorbed cruelty without flinching. But beneath the surface, something was changing. The war news grew worse for the Confederacy each week. Whispers ran through the quarters about Abraham Lincoln, about emancipation, about Union armies that freed enslaved people wherever they marched. And Delilah began to wonder, what would freedom look like? And more importantly, what would justice look like? She didn't know yet that she would soon find out. She didn't know that in just 6 months she would be sitting in Constance's chair, wearing Constance's dresses, giving orders to white men who had once owned her. She didn't know that she would become a legend, a story whispered in slave quarters across the South, a cautionary tale told by white plantation owners who suddenly realized their servants might not be as docile as they appeared. She didn't know any of this yet, but the seeds were planted. The hunter was watching. The prey was moving toward the trap. All that was needed was the right moment, the final push that would transform patience into action, observation into revolution. That moment came on a cold March morning, 6 months later, when everything Delilah had suffered, everything she had endured, everything she had survived, finally reached its breaking point. Not with violence, not with screaming, but with something far more dangerous, with clarity. The absolute crystalline understanding that she would rather die free than live one more day in chains, and that if she was going to die anyway, she might as well take Constance Whitfield down with her. But we're not there yet. First, we must understand the 6 months between September and March, the slow accumulation of cruelties that led to the breaking point, the careful observation that would make the revolution possible. Because Delilah's triumph wasn't an explosion of rage. It was the culmination of 19 years of patience, 6 months of planning, and one perfect moment of opportunity. Through the fall of 1864, life at Magnolia Springs followed its brutal rhythm. Cotton was picked and ginned. Enslaved people worked from sunrise to sunset. Marcus Drummond patrolled with his whip. Constance Whitfield found new ways to inflict pain. Nathaniel Whitfield came and went from Vicksburg, oblivious to the suffering his absence enabled. The war continued. Though news was scarce and unreliable, sometimes they heard that the Confederacy was winning, sometimes they heard it was losing. The enslaved community believed the latter and prayed for Union victory. The white family believed the former and prayed for Confederate triumph. In October, a field hand named Moses tried to escape. He made it 15 miles before the bloodhounds caught him. Marcus Drummond organized a public punishment, 100 lashes, in front of the assembled enslaved population, delivered over the course of an hour to maximize suffering and terrorize witnesses. Moses survived, barely, his back a ruin of shredded flesh. He was put back to work 2 weeks later, moving slowly, never speaking, his spirit broken along with his body. Delilah watched the whipping from the big house porch, forced to attend by Constance, who wanted to remind the house servants what happens to those who forget their place. Delilah watched without expression, but inside she was taking notes. Marcus Drummond enjoyed this work too much. Men who enjoyed cruelty were careless. Carelessness created opportunities. In November, Constance received news that her brother had been killed at the Battle of Franklin in Tennessee. She spent 3 days in bed, laudanum sedated, then emerged more vicious than before. She beat Lily, the 16-year-old housegirl, with a fireplace poker for allowing the bedroom fire to go out during the night. She locked Ruth, the cook, in the smokehouse for 2 days for preparing a meal that didn't meet her standards. She burned Delilah's hand with the flat iron for moving too slowly while dressing her, pressing the hot metal against Delilah's palm until the skin blistered and the smell of burning flesh filled the room. "Your suffering is nothing compared to mine," Constance hissed. "My brother is dead. You should all be grateful I don't kill every one of you." Delilah said nothing. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. She bandaged her hand with strips torn from her own dress and continued her duties. But that night, lying in the cabin she shared with Solomon, she whispered, one day, things will be different." Solomon held her gently, careful not to touch the burned hand. "Hush now," he whispered back. "Don't talk like that. Walls have ears." But Delilah knew something Solomon didn't. She had been in the big house that afternoon when Nathaniel Whitfield returned from Vicksburg with newspapers. She'd been invisible, as always, cleaning the study while the master read and muttered to himself. She had heard him say, "Sherman took Atlanta. The whole state is burning. It's over. We just don't know it yet." The war was being lost. The Confederacy was dying. Change was coming whether the white people of Mississippi wanted it or not. Delilah felt it like electricity in the air before a storm. She just had to survive long enough to see it. In December, Christmas came and went with little celebration. There was no money for festivities. Food was scarce. The enslaved population received no gifts, no extra food, no time off beyond Christmas Day itself. Constance complained constantly about the hardships of wartime, about sacrifices she had to make, about how difficult it was to manage a household with unreliable servants and no supplies. Delilah wanted to laugh at the absurdity. A woman who owned 117 human beings complaining about hardship, but laughter was dangerous, silence was survival. In January of 1865, 3 enslaved men disappeared from the fields. They were never found. Everyone knew they had run to Union lines, but no one said it aloud. Marcus Drummond organized search parties, brought in professional slave catchers with bloodhounds, offered rewards. Nothing. The men were gone, presumably free, and their absence was a wound in the plantation's psyche. If 3 men could escape and not be caught, what was stopping others? Nathaniel Whitfield increased security. He hired 2 additional white overseers to patrol at night. He implemented a pass system that required written permission for any enslaved person to move between different areas of the plantation. He brought in slave patrols from town to conduct random inspections of the quarters, looking for contraband, weapons, writing materials, maps, anything that might facilitate escape or resistance. But here's what Nathaniel didn't understand. You cannot increase security enough to control people who have absolutely nothing left to lose. And increasingly, that's what the enslaved population of Magnolia Springs was becoming. The war news, though censored and controlled, filtered through anyway. Sherman had marched to the sea. Richmond was under siege. The Confederacy was collapsing. Freedom was coming. Everyone could feel it. The question was, would they survive long enough to see it? And for Delilah, another question formed. If freedom was coming anyway, why wait? Why not take it? In February, the breaking point approached. Constance's behavior became increasingly erratic. The laudanum addiction was worse. She would wake in the middle of the night, disoriented, and summon Delilah to her room for no reason beyond loneliness or paranoia. She accused enslaved people of stealing, though nothing was missing. She became convinced that they were plotting against her, which was probably true, but impossible to prove. She punished randomly, viciously, without clear cause. One morning in late February, Constance beat Esther, the elderly herb woman, for preparing a tea that didn't taste right. Esther was 68 years old, frail, barely able to walk. Constance struck her repeatedly with a cane across the shoulders and arms, while Esther stood silent, refusing to cry out, maintaining her dignity even as pain exploded through her aged body. Delilah watched from across the room, holding Constance's shawl, expression neutral. But inside, something cracked. Esther was the spiritual mother of the quarters, the keeper of memories, the connection to Africa and ancestors. Beating Esther wasn't just cruelty to an old woman. It was an attack on everything the enslaved community had managed to preserve: dignity, culture, humanity. That night, Delilah went to Esther's cabin with ointment for the bruises. Esther sat on her narrow bed, moving slowly, pain evident in every movement, but her eyes were sharp when she looked at Delilah. "Your time is coming, child," Esther said quietly. "What do you mean?" Delilah asked, though she knew. "I can feel it. The ancestors are stirring. There's a change in the wind. Something is about to break open, and when it does, you'll need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "To be free. Truly free. Not just free of chains, but free of fear, free of bowing, free of pretending to be less than you are." Esther reached out with a gnarled hand and gripped Delilah's wrist with surprising strength. "When the moment comes, don't hesitate, don't doubt, don't mercy. Take what's yours. Understand?" Delilah nodded slowly. She didn't fully understand yet, but she would, soon. 3 weeks later, on March 10th, 1865, Nathaniel Whitfield returned from Vicksburg with devastating news. Robert E. Lee was about to surrender. The war was over, the Confederacy was dead, and with it, the institution of slavery that had built the South's wealth for 2.5 centuries. He told no one except Constance, but Delilah was in the room, arranging flowers, invisible as furniture. She heard everything. "It's finished," Nathaniel said, pouring himself a large whiskey, even though it was only 11 o'clock in the morning. "Lee can't hold Richmond. Grant has him surrounded. It's a matter of days, maybe a week, then surrender. Then it's all over." Constance sat frozen in her chair. "What about us? What about the plantation? What about them?" She gestured vaguely toward the quarters. "I don't know. I suspect Lincoln will free them all. There's talk of compensation for owners, but I don't believe it will happen. Everything we built, Constance. Everything. Gone." "No." Constance's voice was sharp. "They can't take our property. It's theft. It's unconstitutional. The Constitution is whatever the winner says it is, and we lost." Delilah continued arranging flowers, hands steady, face impassive, but inside her heart was racing. Freedom, real freedom, not just for her, but for everyone. Solomon, Esther, the children in the quarters, everyone. Then Nathaniel said something that changed everything. "We need to sell them, as many as possible, as quickly as possible, before the announcement becomes official. I have contacts in Texas who might still buy. We can recoup some value before the market collapses entirely." Constance nodded slowly. "The troublemakers first, and the expensive ones. Keep only the most docile for household work until we figure out what comes next." They discussed specifics. Solomon was valuable, skilled, healthy. He would bring a good price. Esther was too old to sell, but could be turned out with no support, left to starve. Moses, the man who had tried to escape, would be sold south to the harshest conditions available as punishment. A dozen others were named, families to be separated, lives to be destroyed one last time before the system that enabled such destruction finally died. And then Constance said, "What about Delilah?" Nathaniel shrugged. "She's loyal, useful, keep her." "I'm tired of her. There's something in her eyes lately, an insolence. I want her gone." "Fine, I'll add her to the list." Delilah's hands didn't shake. The flower arrangement remained perfect. But inside, the final piece fell into place. They were going to sell her, sell Solomon, destroy what little they had left in this world. And for what? For money to cushion the white family's fall from power, to extract final drops of value from human property before property ceased to exist. No. The word formed in Delilah's mind with absolute clarity. No, she would not be sold. She would not watch Solomon be sold. She would not stand by while Esther was cast out to die. She would not allow these people to destroy one more life, steal one more moment, inflict one more cruelty. No. The hunter stopped watching. It was time to move. That evening, Delilah worked with perfect normalcy. She undressed Constance, helped her into her nightgown, brushed her hair 100 strokes as required, prepared her laudanum dose, turned down the bed. Everything exactly as always. Constance noticed nothing unusual because there was nothing unusual to notice. Delilah had spent 19 years perfecting the mask of submission. One more night was easy. After Constance dismissed her, Delilah returned to her cabin in the quarters. Solomon was already asleep, exhausted from a day of carpentry work. She sat on the edge of their bed, watching him in the darkness, memorizing his face. She loved this man. He was the only good thing slavery had ever allowed her to keep, and they were going to take him away. Not if she could help it. She left the cabin quietly and walked through the quarters to Esther's cabin. The old woman was awake, as if she'd been expecting Delilah. "It's time," Delilah said simply. Esther nodded. "What do you need?" Everything you know, every plant, every root, every method. I need to know how to take control, how to hold it, how to make them afraid." Esther smiled, a grin that showed missing teeth and absolute satisfaction. "Finally, sit down, child, we have work to do." They talked through the night. Esther shared knowledge she had carried from Africa through the Middle Passage. Through 68 years of survival, she explained which herbs could induce sleep without killing, which roots could cause temporary paralysis, which mushrooms could cloud the mind and make people susceptible to suggestion, which combinations could incapacitate without leaving obvious signs of poisoning. But more than that, Esther taught Delilah about power. Not the power of violence, but the power of psychology. "White folks are terrified of us," Esther explained. "They hide it under cruelty, but the fear is always there. Fear that we'll rise up, fear that we outnumber them, fear that their God will judge them for what they've done. You use that fear, you make it grow, you show them that everything they believed about themselves and us was a lie." "How?" Delilah asked. "You take what they think is theirs. You sit where they sit. You wear what they wear. You make them serve you. And you do it without violence, without killing, without giving them any excuse to call in authorities. You make it clear that the only thing that kept you in chains was their violence. And once that violence is neutralized, they have nothing. They are nothing." Delilah absorbed every word. By the time dawn approached, she had a plan. Not just revenge, revolution, a complete inversion of power that would last just long enough to prove a point. That the only difference between master and slave was violence. Take away the violence and the master became nothing. She returned to her cabin as Solomon was waking. He looked at her, saw something different in her eyes, and started to speak. She put a finger to her lips. "Not yet," she whispered, "but soon. Soon everything changes. Trust me." He wanted to ask questions. She saw the worry in his face, but he nodded. After 13 years of marriage, he trusted her with his life, which was good, because in the next few days, that trust would be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. March 11th. Delilah went about her duties normally, but everything had changed. She wasn't acting submissive anymore. She was choosing to appear submissive. It's a subtle difference, but enormous. Before, submission was survival. Now submission was strategy. She observed everything with new eyes. The way Constance moved through the house, her routines, her habits, the keys she carried, the bells she rang to summon servants, the rooms she frequented, the times she was alone, the times she was vulnerable. Marcus Drummond's movements, his rides to the fields, his return for lunch, his evening drinking, his predictable, violent, stupid patterns, Nathaniel Whitfield's absences. He would leave for Vicksburg the next day and not return for a week. Perfect timing, the household staff. Who could be trusted? Who was brave enough to help? Who would simply stay quiet and watch? Delilah spoke quietly to key people. Ruth the cook, Sarah the laundress, Lily the housegirl. She spoke to Solomon. She spoke to field hands she trusted. She didn't reveal the full plan because the fewer people who knew, the safer. But she planted seeds. Change is coming. Be ready. When you see me do something unusual, don't interfere. Trust me. Most importantly, she went back to Esther and collected the supplies they had discussed. Herbs and roots that Esther had been growing for decades, some for healing, some for other purposes. Delilah hid them in her cabin, wrapped carefully in cloth, labeled only in ways she understood. March 12th. Nathaniel Whitfield left for Vicksburg. He would not return until March 20th. This was Delilah's window. That evening, she prepared Constance's laudanum dose with extra care, but this time, she added something else, a tincture made from valerian root and poppy, mixed with a touch of hemlock. Not enough to kill, enough to make Constance sleep deeply, dreamlessly for 12 hours, enough to make her woozy and suggestible when she woke. Constance drank her laudanum as usual and fell asleep within 20 minutes. Delilah waited another 30 minutes to be sure, then gently checked. Constance was deeply unconscious, breathing steadily but slowly. Perfect. Delilah moved quickly. She took the keys from Constance's dresser, keys to the locked storage rooms, the silver cabinet, the gun safe, the master's study. She went through the big house systematically, unlocking everything that had been locked. She went to the gun safe and removed all the weapons, 3 rifles, 2 pistols, ammunition. She distributed these to Solomon and 2 other trusted men, with instructions. If any white man tries to enter the big house or leave the plantation, stop them. Don't shoot unless absolutely necessary, but make it clear that the threat is real. She went to the quarters and spoke to the community. Tomorrow, everything changes. Constance will wake up, but she won't be in charge anymore. I will be. Marcus Drummond will try to interfere. We'll handle him. Master Whitfield is gone for a week. By the time he returns, it will be too late. Freedom is coming, but we're not waiting. We're taking it. Now. Tonight. Are you with me? There was a long silence. Then Esther stood, slowly, painfully, but with absolute determination. I'm with you. Solomon stepped forward. I'm with you. Ruth, the cook. I'm with you. One by one, voices in the darkness. I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm with you. Not everyone. Some were too frightened. Some didn't believe it could work. Some thought it was suicide. But enough to make it possible. Then here's what we do, Delilah said, and she laid out the plan. March 13th, dawn, the day the world turned upside down. Delilah woke Constance at the usual time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Constance was groggy, confused, struggling to focus. I feel strange, she mumbled. You're just tired, ma'am, Delilah said soothingly. Let me help you dress. But instead of selecting one of Constance's typical morning dresses, Delilah pulled out the simplest, roughest dress in the wardrobe, a plain cotton work dress that Constance hadn't worn in years. You'll wear this today. What? No, that's not appropriate. Give me the blue silk. No. Delilah's voice was calm, firm, and completely without the subservience of 19 years. You'll wear this. Constance's eyes widened, shock penetrating the drug-induced fog. Excuse me. How dare you speak to me in that tone? I'll have Marcus. Marcus Drummond is currently locked in his cabin with 2 armed men outside. He's not coming to help you. No one is coming to help you now. You'll wear this dress or you'll wear nothing. Your choice. The color drained from Constance's face. This is insane. You can't. I can. And I am. Get dressed. For perhaps the first time in her 43 years, Constance Whitfield was genuinely afraid. She looked into Delilah's eyes and saw something that hadn't been there before, the complete absence of fear. Without fear, without chains, without violence to enforce the hierarchy, Constance had no power at all. She was just a woman, older, weaker, softer than the woman standing before her. With shaking hands, Constance put on the plain cotton dress. It fit poorly, hung awkwardly on her frame that was used to corsets and structured garments. Good, Delilah said. Now we're going to walk downstairs. You'll see that things have changed. Don't scream. Don't run. Don't resist. If you cooperate, you won't be hurt. If you fight, well. Delilah let the sentence hang unfinished. The threat was clear. They descended the stairs together. Constance gasped when she saw the front hallway. Solomon stood there, holding one of Nathaniel's rifles. He didn't point it at Constance, but the message was obvious. Lily sat in the parlor chair where Constance usually took her morning tea. Ruth was in the dining room eating breakfast from the fine china that slaves were never allowed to touch. "What is this?" Constance whispered. "This is freedom," Delilah replied. "The war is over. Slavery is ending. Your husband told you 3 days ago, remember? He said Lincoln would free us all. Well, we decided not to wait for Lincoln. We freed ourselves. This is illegal. This is insurrection. When Nathaniel returns, when your husband returns, what will he do? Call the authorities. Tell them his slaves rebelled because he was planning to sell them one last time before emancipation. Explain that he was trying to cheat the system. I don't think so. Besides, we both know Robert E. Lee is about to surrender, maybe already has. Your world is over, Constance. The question is, what happens next? Constance stood frozen, mind racing through options. She could try to run. But where? Armed men controlled the entrances. She could try to fight, but she was soft from years of luxury, while Delilah was strong from years of labor. She could scream for help, but who would hear? The house servants were all on Delilah's side. The field hands would laugh. Marcus was locked up. "What do you want?" Constance finally asked, and her voice broke on the last word. "I want you to understand what it feels like to be powerless. I want you to experience one day of what you inflicted on us for our entire lives. I want you to serve me the way I served you. And if you do it well, if you're obedient and useful and don't cause trouble, you'll be treated fairly. But if you resist, if you try to escape, if you're difficult—" Delilah paused and smiled without warmth. "Then you'll discover that I learned pain from the best teacher, you." Delilah turned to Ruth. "Prepare breakfast, full spread, eggs, ham, biscuits, jam, coffee, the best we have." "Yes, ma'am," Ruth said with a grin, emphasizing the title that had always belonged to Constance. Delilah turned to Solomon. "Bring Marcus Drummond here. I want to speak with him." Solomon nodded and left. Delilah took Constance's arm, not roughly but firmly, and guided her to the kitchen. "You'll help Ruth with breakfast. You remember how kitchens work, don't you? Or has it been so long since you did any actual work that you've forgotten?" Constance's face flushed with humiliation. "I will not." Delilah's hand moved faster than thought, delivering a sharp slap across Constance's face. Not hard enough to cause real damage, hard enough to shock. That's the first and only warning. Every time you refuse a direct order, there will be consequences. You taught me about consequences, Constance. Every burn, every beating, every humiliation. I learned from the master. Now I'm the master, and you're the slave. Do you understand?" Tears filled Constance's eyes, not just from the physical pain, but from the absolute psychological devastation of the role reversal. She nodded, unable to speak. "Good. Now help Ruth with breakfast. And Constance, do a good job. Because if the food isn't perfect, you'll be punished. Sound familiar?" Delilah walked out of the kitchen and into the parlor. She stood in front of the large mirror, looking at herself in her plain slave dress. Then she smiled. Today would be interesting, but she needed to change clothes. She went upstairs to Constance's bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Row after row of beautiful dresses, silks and satins and laces, all bought with money earned from stolen labor. Delilah selected the finest dress Constance owned. A blue silk with elaborate embroidery and French lace, a dress that had cost more than most enslaved people earned in a lifetime. She put it on, slowly, reverently, feeling the fabric against her skin. She had dressed Constance in this dress a dozen times. She had never imagined wearing it herself. She looked in the mirror. The dress fit well. She was smaller than Constance, but not much. With the corset properly laced, it was perfect. She did her hair carefully, copying the elaborate styles she had created on Constance's head for 19 years. She even applied a touch of face powder and lip rouge from Constance's vanity. When she descended the stairs again, the change was complete. She wasn't dressed as a slave anymore. She looked like a lady. She looked like someone with power. Solomon returned with Marcus Drummond. The overseer was furious, face red, eyes wild. "You're all going to hang," he snarled. "Every last one of you. When Master Whitfield—" "Master Whitfield isn't here," Delilah interrupted calmly, "and won't be for a week. By then, much will have changed. Sit down, Marcus. I don't take orders from—" Two men, both large, both armed. put hands on Marcus's shoulders and forced him into a chair. He struggled, but was outnumbered and unarmed. Delilah stood in front of him, looking down. "You've been overseer here for 12 years. In that time, you've whipped, beaten, and tortured hundreds of people. You've killed 3 men with your own hands. You've raped women who couldn't refuse you. You've sold children away from their mothers. You've done all this without remorse, without hesitation, because you believed we were property, animals, things to be used and broken." Marcus glared at her, but said nothing. "I want you to understand something," Delilah continued. "I could kill you right now. I could have Solomon take you out to the fields and put a bullet in your head. I could have the men you've tortured beat you to death slowly, giving you 1 lash for every lash you've given. I could do any of that, and no one would stop me. Do you understand?" A flicker of fear crossed Marcus's face. He nodded slowly. "But I won't. Because I'm not you. I don't enjoy hurting people. I don't take pleasure in power for its own sake. What I want is simpler. I want you to work. Today, you'll go to the fields with the other workers. You'll pick cotton. You'll work from sunup to sundown. You'll experience 1 day of what you've inflicted for 12 years. If you work hard, you'll be treated fairly. If you refuse, if you're lazy, if you cause trouble, then you'll be whipped, just like you would have whipped any of us. Fair?" "This is insane," Marcus said, but his voice was uncertain now. "No, this is justice. Take him to the fields, give him a sack, put him to work." The men dragged Marcus away. He didn't resist. What could he do? He was one man. The entire plantation was against him, and somewhere in his brutalized mind, he was starting to realize that the world he had known was ending. The day progressed. Delilah sat in the parlor, ate breakfast from fine china, drank coffee from a porcelain cup. Constance served her, hands shaking, face blank with shock. When Constance spilled coffee, Delilah made her clean it up on hands and knees. When Constance served cold eggs, Delilah sent her back to the kitchen to prepare more, warning that the next mistake would result in punishment. Are you uncomfortable yet? Does part of you think Delilah is going too far? Remember what Constance did for 19 years. Remember the burns, the beatings, the casual cruelty. Remember that Constance was planning to sell Delilah and separate her from the only man she'd ever loved. Remember that this isn't fiction. This is historical reality sanitized and minimized for textbooks. This happened every day for 2.5 centuries. And sometimes, very rarely, the oppressed found a moment to flip the script and show their oppressors what oppression actually felt like. The news spread through the plantation by noon. The mistress was serving the slave. The overseer was in the fields. The world was upside down. Some enslaved people were terrified, certain this would end in mass executions. Others were exhilarated, barely able to believe what they were witnessing. Everyone understood this couldn't last. But for one day, for one precious day, they weren't slaves. Delilah made rounds through the big house, giving instructions. Lily would continue her regular duties, but with better conditions. Ruth would cook what she wanted, not what Constance demanded. Sarah would do laundry at her own pace. The house servants would keep the house running because a functioning household benefited everyone. But they would do it with dignity, with breaks, with decent treatment. In the fields, work continued but differently. No one stood over the workers with a whip. No one screamed insults or enforced impossible quotas. People worked at sustainable paces. They talked and sang openly. They took breaks when needed. Productivity actually increased because people weren't exhausted, brutalized, or resentful. Marcus Drummond lasted 2 hours in the fields before collapsing from heat and exhaustion. He had never done physical labor in his life. Within 2 hours, his hands were blistered, his back screaming with pain, his pride shattered. When he stopped working, The driver, James, who had always enforced Marcus's cruel orders, stood over him with a cane. "Get up," James said quietly. "You're not done." "I can't," Marcus gasped. "That's what you've been told 1,000 times by people who were beaten until they could work. Get up." Marcus got up. He worked through the afternoon, moving slowly, suffering silently, learning what he had inflicted. That evening, Delilah called a meeting of the entire plantation community in front of the big house. 117 enslaved people, minus the handful too young or too old or too ill to attend. They gathered as the sun set, uncertain, hopeful, terrified, exhilarated. Delilah stood on the big house porch, still wearing Constance's blue silk dress, and addressed them. "The war is ending," she said simply. "Slavery is ending. Lincoln is freeing us, or maybe already has. We don't know for sure because they've been hiding the news from us. But Master Whitfield said it himself 3 days ago. Robert E. Lee is about to surrender. The Confederacy is dead, and with it, everything that kept us in chains." A murmur ran through the crowd, hope mixed with disbelief. "I don't know what comes next," Delilah continued. "I don't know if Union soldiers will arrive tomorrow or next month. I don't know what freedom looks like beyond these fences. But I know this: we're not waiting anymore. As of today, as of this moment, Magnolia Springs Plantation is ours. Not the master's, not the mistress's, ours. We'll work it. We'll run it. We'll decide for ourselves how to live. And if Nathaniel Whitfield wants to challenge that when he returns, we'll deal with it then. But for now, right now, we're free." Silence. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then applause swept through the crowd, building to cheers, to shouting, to crying, people who had never been allowed to express joy openly, who had suppressed emotions for lifetimes, suddenly letting it all out. Esther stood and raised her voice in a spiritual, "Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last." The crowd joined in, voices rising in the night air, singing loud enough to be heard for miles, not caring who heard because, for the first time in their lives, they didn't have to care. Delilah watched from the porch, tears streaming down her face. This was what freedom felt like, not just absence of chains, but presence of choice, not just escape from cruelty, but embrace of dignity. This was what they had been denied for so long. And now, even if just for days, even if just for this moment, they had it. The celebration continued late into the night. There was food shared from the plantation stores. There was music, drums made from barrels, fiddles that had been hidden for years. There was dancing. There was laughter. There was community expressing itself freely for the first time in memory. Constance watched from a locked bedroom window, face pressed against the glass, witnessing her world's complete inversion. Her slaves were celebrating. Her servant was wearing her dress. Her husband wasn't there to protect her. Everything she had believed about natural order, about racial hierarchy, about her own superiority, was revealed as a lie maintained only by violence. She pounded on the window, screaming for help. No one came. No one cared. The next morning, March 14th, Delilah established structure. Freedom didn't mean chaos. It meant organization without oppression. She appointed committees, food distribution led by Ruth, work coordination led by Solomon, security led by the men guarding the entrances, childcare coordinated by elderly women who could no longer work fields but could nurture the young. Everyone had a role, everyone contributed, no one was owned. Constance was assigned work, laundry. She would spend 8 hours a day washing clothes, the same work Sarah had done for years. Sarah would supervise, and Sarah had a long memory of every cruel word, every impossible demand, every punishment for insufficient perfection. Marcus Drummond continued field work. By the third day, his hands bled constantly. His back felt broken. His spirit was crushed. He had become what he had always created, a broken laborer who existed only to work. James, the driver who had enforced Marcus's cruelty, faced a different fate. The community held a meeting to decide his fate. Some wanted him punished severely. Others understood he had been trapped in an impossible position. Ultimately, they decided he would continue as work coordinator but would be watched closely. One mistake, one abuse of authority, and he would face consequences. He accepted these terms with visible relief. Days passed. March 14th, March 15th, March 16th. Each day the plantation functioned more smoothly. Work got done, food was prepared, the property was maintained. But it was all done differently, with dignity, with adequate rest, with community input, with shared decision-making. Delilah presided over it all from the big house. She didn't become a tyrant. She didn't use her power to inflict cruelty. She used it to organize, to mediate disputes, to ensure fairness. She wore Constance's dresses, sat in Constance's chairs, made decisions from Constance's desk. But she made them with consultation, with consideration, with the community's well-being as primary concern. Some neighboring plantations heard rumors. Some sent messengers. Delilah met them at the entrance, still wearing silk dresses, still projecting authority, and told them simply, "The Whitfields are indisposed. Business is being managed. Return in a week." Ooh, the messengers left confused but without pressing. What could they do? She looked like a lady. She spoke with authority, and they had no reason to investigate further. On March 17th, Solomon came to Delilah with news. Some of the field hands want to leave. They want to head north immediately, not wait for anything official. What should I tell them? Delilah considered. Tell them they're free to go. They've always been free, they just couldn't exercise it. If they want to leave now, provide them with food for the journey, maps if we have them, information about the underground railroad routes. Don't stop them, but also warn them. The war might be over, but the South is still dangerous. Slave patrols still exist. Angry white men who've lost the war are looking for targets. Leaving might be more dangerous than staying for a few more weeks until official word comes. But ultimately, it's their choice. 10 people left over the next 2 days. The rest stayed, preferring known safety to unknown risk. On March 19th, Constance broke. She had spent a week doing laundry, washing other people's clothes, scrubbing until her hands bled and her back ached. She had eaten simple food in the kitchen with other workers. She had slept in a small room instead of her luxurious bedroom. She had been ordered around by Sarah, who showed considerably more mercy than Constance ever had, but still demanded work be done properly. Constance approached Delilah in the parlor, where Delilah sat reading from Nathaniel's library. "Please," Constance said, and the word came out as a sob. "Please. I understand you've made your point. I was cruel. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please let this end." Delilah looked up from her book. She studied Constance for a long moment, the woman who had burned her, beaten her, humiliated her, nearly broken her spirit dozens of times over 19 years, the woman who had planned to sell her and Solomon apart just to earn a final profit before slavery ended. "Do you really understand?" Delilah asked quietly, "or are you just tired of suffering? Because understanding means recognizing that everything you did to me, to Esther, to Ruth, to Lily, to every person you owned, was evil. Understanding means acknowledging that you're not superior to us, that you never were, that the only thing that gave you power was violence. Understanding means accepting that we're human beings who deserve dignity, and you denied it for your own comfort and ego. So do you understand, or do you just want the pain to stop?" Constance opened her mouth to answer, but couldn't. She didn't understand. She wanted the pain to stop, but she still couldn't truly grasp that the people she had owned were as fully human as herself. The conditioning was too deep, the propaganda too thorough. the convenience of believing otherwise too strong. "I didn't think so," Delilah said. "Go back to work. Maybe another few days will help." Constance left, shoulders slumped, spirit broken. That night, Delilah sat with Solomon and Esther in the big house parlor, an unthinkable scenario just weeks before. 3 enslaved people sitting in the master's furniture, drinking the master's whiskey, discussing their future. "Nathaniel returns tomorrow," Solomon said. "What's the plan?" "The truth," Delilah replied. "He can't do anything. The war is over. Slavery is ending. If he calls authorities, we'll tell them he was planning to sell us illegally after learning about emancipation. If he tries violence, we're armed and many. If he tries to reassert control, we'll simply leave and take everyone with us. He has no power anymore. He just doesn't know it yet." "And Constance?" Esther asked. "She'll continue working until Nathaniel returns. Then they can figure out their lives together. We're done caring for them. We're done serving them. We're done being responsible for their comfort while they destroy us. They're on their own now." "It won't last," Esther said quietly. "Even after official emancipation, white folks will find ways to keep us down. New laws, new systems, new ways to steal our labor and dignity. This moment, these 17 days, they're special, but they're not the end of the fight." "I know," Delilah said, "but we've proven something. We've proven we can do it. Run a plantation, manage ourselves, live with dignity, create community without masters. When the next fight comes, and it will, we'll remember these 17 days. We'll remember what freedom felt like, and we'll fight to keep it." March 20th. Nathaniel Whitfield returned from Vicksburg in the late afternoon. He rode up the drive expecting normalcy. Enslaved people working fields, house in order, wife managing domestic affairs, overseer enforcing discipline. Instead, he saw people moving freely, talking openly, no one rushing to acknowledge his arrival. He saw field hands taking a break in the middle of the afternoon, sitting in shade, drinking water, laughing. He saw no one in chains, no one being supervised with violence, no one looking afraid. He rode to the big house and dismounted. Solomon met him at the door, not with submission but with neutral politeness. "Master Whitfield, come in." Nathaniel's face reddened. "Where is Marcus? Where is my wife? What is going on here?" "Your wife is in the wash house. Marcus is in the fields, and things have changed. You should come inside and sit down." Nathaniel pushed past Solomon and entered his home. He stopped dead in the doorway to the parlor. Delilah sat in his wife's chair, wearing his wife's dress, reading his books, drinking his whiskey. She looked up calmly. "Hello, Master Whitfield. Or should I say, former master. Please sit down. We have much to discuss." Nathaniel's hand went to his hip, looking for the pistol he usually carried. It wasn't there. Solomon had removed it when he dismounted. "What is the meaning of this? Where is Constance? I'll have you whipped. You'll do nothing," Delilah interrupted, "because you have no power here anymore. Sit down." Something in her voice, some absolute certainty, made Nathaniel comply. He sat, mind racing, trying to understand. "The war ended 9 days ago," Delilah said. "Lee surrendered at Appomattox. The Confederacy is dead. Slavery is over. You knew it was coming. You told Constance as much on March 10th. I heard you. I heard you planning to sell us before the announcement became official. You were going to separate me from my husband, cast out Esther to die, sell Solomon to Texas, destroy families one last time, just to squeeze final profit from human beings you never had the right to own. So, we decided not to wait. We freed ourselves 2 weeks ago. And for 17 days, we've run this plantation better than you ever did, without whips, without torture, without cruelty. We've proven that the only thing keeping us down was violence. Take away the violence, and we're more capable than you ever were." Nathaniel listened, face cycling through shock, rage, fear, denial. "This is illegal. This is theft. I'll call the authorities. I'll—" "Call them," Delilah said. "Tell them your slaves rebelled after you tried to sell them illegally. Tell them you were attempting to circumvent emancipation. See how that goes. Or you can accept reality. Slavery is over. We're leaving. All of us. You can keep your land. You can keep your big house. But you'll work it yourself because we're done. We're free, really free, and there's nothing you can do about it." "Constance," Nathaniel said weakly, "where is my wife?" "In the wash-house, doing laundry, learning humility. You can retrieve her if you'd like." Nathaniel stood shakily and walked toward the wash-house. Delilah followed at a distance, wanting to see the reunion. Constance looked up when Nathaniel entered. She stood among steaming tubs, clothes soaking, hands red and raw, face exhausted. When she saw her husband, she burst into tears and ran to him. "Nathaniel, and thank God, they've held me prisoner. That woman, Delilah, she took over everything. She made me work like a slave. She wore my dresses. She took my house. You have to do something. You have to—" "It's over," Nathaniel said quietly. "The war is over. Slavery is over. We lost." Constance stopped, staring at him. "What?" "Lee surrendered 9 days ago. Lincoln has freed them all. Every enslaved person in the Confederacy. They're free. We have no legal right to them anymore. It's finished." Constance collapsed against him, sobbing. Not from relief, but from loss. Loss of power, loss of status, loss of the system that had given her someone to feel superior to, someone to take out her frustrations on, someone to control when everything else in her life was controlled by men. Delilah watched from the doorway. She felt no satisfaction in their suffering. She felt no joy in their humiliation. She just felt tired, tired of hatred, tired of anger, tired of fighting. She wanted to be done with these people and everything they represented. "We're leaving tomorrow morning," Delilah said. "Everyone on this plantation. We're walking north until we find Union soldiers, or until we reach a place where we can start fresh. You can't stop us. You can try to call authorities, but by the time anyone arrives, we'll be long gone. And honestly, I don't think you will. Because deep down, beneath all your bluster and violence, you know we have the moral right and you never did." She turned and walked away, leaving Nathaniel and Constance standing in the wash-house, two people whose entire world had collapsed and who had no idea how to build a new one. That night, the community met one final time. Delilah stood before them and explained, "We're leaving at dawn. Everyone who wants to come is welcome. We'll head north to Vicksburg, find Union troops, get official documentation of our freedom. From there, whoever wants to stay in Mississippi can. Whoever wants to go further north can do that too. We'll stay together as long as it benefits everyone, then go our separate ways as free people making free choices." "What about the Whitfields?" someone asked. "Leave them. They're not our responsibility anymore. They never should have been our responsibility in the first place." "What about supplies? We'll need food, clothes, money. We take what we need from the plantation stores. We've earned it 1,000 times over with stolen labor. It's not theft, it's collection of wages long overdue." The community agreed. They spent the evening packing, preparing, saying goodbyes to the place that had been both home and prison. Some people were terrified of the unknown future. Others were exhilarated. Everyone was determined. Delilah had one final task. She went to Constance's bedroom and removed the blue silk dress. She folded it carefully and placed it on the bed. She put on her own simple dress again, the clothes of an enslaved woman, though she wasn't enslaved anymore. She looked in the mirror one last time, seeing not a slave, but a free woman who had conquered her oppressor through intelligence, not violence, through strategy, not rage. She went downstairs and found Esther sitting in the parlor. "Ready?" Delilah asked. "Been ready my whole life," Esther replied with a smile. Thought I'd die a slave, never imagined I'd die free. You're not dying yet, old woman. Maybe not. But even if I die tomorrow, I die free. I die having seen this moment. That's enough. Solomon found them there. Everyone's ready. We leave at first light. The three of them sat together through the night, watching through windows as the sun slowly approached the horizon. When dawn broke on March 21st, 1865, 107 people walked away from Magnolia Springs Plantation. 10 had left earlier. Everyone else chose freedom over familiarity. They walked in a long column up the drive, past the fields they had worked, past the quarters they had lived in, past the whipping post where so many had suffered. They walked without looking back, eyes forward, toward a future they couldn't see but chose anyway. Nathaniel and Constance watched from the big house porch. They made no attempt to stop the exodus. What could they do? The people walking away had been their property yesterday, according to laws that no longer existed. Today they were human beings with rights, protected by Union victory and presidential proclamation. Nathaniel and Constance watched their wealth walk away in human form, and there was absolutely nothing they could do but watch. Delilah walked at the front of the column, next to Solomon and Esther. When they reached the road, she paused and looked back one final time. The plantation looked smaller from this distance, less imposing, less powerful, just land and buildings. Not a kingdom, not an empire, just property that would slowly decay without the stolen labor that had maintained it. She turned forward again and never looked back. The group reached Vicksburg 3 days later. Union troops were everywhere, occupying the city, managing the transition from Confederate territory to Union control. Delilah approached a Union officer and explained the situation. The officer, a captain from Ohio, listened with obvious shock. "You took over the plantation for 17 days without violence?" "Without unnecessary violence," Delilah corrected. "We defended ourselves, but we didn't kill anyone. We just showed them what powerlessness felt like." The captain shook his head in amazement. "That's the most extraordinary thing I've heard since this war began. You should tell this story. People need to know what you did." "Maybe someday," Delilah said. "Right now we just need documentation that we're free, papers that say we're legally human beings with rights." The captain provided documentation for everyone in the group. Official papers that declared them free people, no longer subject to ownership. Many people cried when they received the papers. Solomon folded his carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket over his heart. Esther kissed hers and whispered thanks to ancestors who hadn't lived to see this moment. Over the following weeks, the group dispersed. Some stayed in Vicksburg, finding work and building lives. Some headed further north to St. Louis, Chicago, even Canada. Some returned to plantation areas to search for family members sold away years before. Everyone went their separate ways, connected by the memory of 17 days when the world turned upside down. Delilah and Solomon chose to go north. They traveled to Ohio, where they found a small black community willing to welcome newcomers. Solomon found work as a carpenter, his skills valuable and respected. Delilah found work as a seamstress, her years of experience dressing Constance translating to valuable knowledge of fine clothing construction. They bought a small house. The papers said they owned it. The concept was almost impossible to comprehend. They owned something. No one owned them. They could go where they wanted, work for whom they wanted, leave if they chose. Freedom. But freedom came with its own challenges. Racism didn't die with slavery. Violence against black people continued. Economic exploitation found new forms. Sharecropping that was slavery by another name. Convict leasing that put black men back in chains under the guise of criminal justice. Jim Crow laws that would soon segregate and oppress. Esther had been right. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But they had won something crucial, the knowledge that they could resist, that they could organize, that they could, even briefly, overthrow the systems that oppressed them. The memory of those 17 days sustained them through the hard times that followed. News of what happened at Magnolia Springs spread slowly through the black community in the South. The story grew in the telling, becoming legend, becoming myth, becoming inspiration. They said a woman single-handedly overthrew a plantation. They said she wore the mistress's dresses and made the overseer pick cotton. They said she ruled for weeks before walking away freely. Some details were exaggerated, some were accurate. All of it became a story that whispered through quarters and churches and secret meetings. Resistance is possible. Power can be challenged. Masters are only masters because of violence. Take away violence, and they're nothing. The story terrified white plantation owners across the South. If it could happen at Magnolia Springs, it could happen anywhere. They increased security, hired more overseers, tightened restrictions. But the fear remained. The fear that their slaves were actually intelligent, capable human beings who could, at any moment, choose to stop being slaves. That realization was more terrifying than any Union army. Historians debate what happened at Magnolia Springs. Some dismiss it as exaggeration. Some claim it never happened at all. Some acknowledge the core events but downplay their significance. But the story persists in oral tradition, in family histories, in the collective memory of African Americans whose ancestors survived slavery and fought for freedom in countless ways, big and small, violent and non-violent, recorded and forgotten. What is undeniable is this: slavery ended, not just because of Union armies or presidential proclamations, but because millions of enslaved people resisted in every way they could. Some ran, some fought, some sabotaged, some poisoned, some burned. Some, like Delilah, found ways to undermine the system from within, to prove that slavery existed only because of violence, and that without violence, the pretense of racial hierarchy collapsed completely. Delilah lived until 1908. She was 77 years old when she died, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who had all been born free. She never returned to Mississippi. She never saw Magnolia Springs again. She never learned what happened to Nathaniel and Constance Whitfield, and she didn't care. But she told her story. She told it to her family, to her community, to anyone who would listen. She wanted people to know what happened. She wanted people to remember that enslaved people weren't passive victims waiting for white saviors. They were active resistors, intelligent strategists, human beings fighting for humanity by any means available. Solomon died in 1902. He and Delilah had 43 years of free marriage, legally recognized, never threatened by sale or separation. They had 4 children, 11 grandchildren, and died knowing their descendants would grow up in a world that, while still unjust, was at least officially free. Esther died in 1867, just 2 years after freedom. She was 70 years old. She died in Ohio, in a bed, in a house, surrounded by people who loved her. She died free. And in her last words, she said, "Tell them we won. Tell them we proved it was possible. Tell them never to stop fighting." They told them. The story spread, and the fight continued. The legacy of Magnolia Springs lives on in ways both obvious and subtle. It lives on in the fear of white Southerners who realized their world could end overnight. It lives on in the inspiration of black communities who learned that resistance was possible. It lives on in the historical record, documented in Union Army reports, in letters from the period, in oral histories passed down through generations. But most importantly, it lives on in the understanding that oppression only exists because of violence. Take away the violence, neutralize the threat, and suddenly the pretense of superiority collapses. Delilah proved that a woman with no weapons beyond intelligence and patience could overthrow a system that had existed for centuries. She proved that masters were only masters because of whips and chains and guns. Take those away, and they were just weak people who had never learned to work, never developed character, never built anything beyond monuments to stolen labor. Today, in the 21st century, the lessons of Magnolia Springs remain relevant. Systemic oppression still exists, economic exploitation continues, racism persists. The specifics have changed, but the fundamental dynamics remain. Those with power use violence, whether physical or structural, to maintain control over those without power, and resistance, whether through protest, organization, political action, or 1,000 other forms, remains necessary. What would Delilah think of modern America? She would see progress, legal equality, civil rights, black people in positions of power that would have been unthinkable in her time. But she would also see continuity, mass incarceration, police brutality, wealth inequality, voter suppression, all the ways that systems adapt to maintain hierarchies even when explicit slavery is illegal. She would tell us what she told her grandchildren: the fight never ends. But that doesn't mean it's not worth fighting. Every victory matters, every moment of freedom matters, every act of resistance matters. Because oppression depends on the oppressed accepting their status as natural and inevitable. The moment you reject that lie, the moment you assert your full humanity, the moment you resist, you've already won something crucial, even if the system doesn't fall immediately. The story of Magnolia Springs is a story of one woman who refused to accept her assigned role, who watched and waited and learned for 19 years, who recognized the moment when the world was changing, who seized that moment with both hands and turned power upside down for 17 days, who proved that slavery was maintained only by violence, and without violence, the enslaved were more capable than their masters. It's a story of intelligence defeating brutality, strategy defeating strength, patience defeating oppression. It's a story that should be taught in every school, told in every church, remembered in every community. It's a story of resistance and triumph and the absolute refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. It's a story that says you are not powerless. Systems that seem unchangeable can be changed. People who seem untouchable can be touched. If you're smart, if you're patient, if you wait for your moment and seize it with both hands, you can overthrow anything. Delilah did it. And so can you. This is the America that textbooks won't teach you. This is the history that makes people uncomfortable. This is the truth about slavery, not just suffering, but resistance, not just victimhood, but agency, not just tragedy, but occasional triumph. These stories matter, these voices matter, these lives matter. Remember Magnolia Springs, remember Delilah. Remember that for 17 days in March of 1865, an enslaved woman became free through intelligence and courage, dethroned her oppressor through strategy and patience, and proved that freedom isn't something granted by masters, but something taken by the enslaved. Remember this story, share this story. Let it inspire you to resist whatever forms of oppression you face. Let it remind you that power is never permanent, that hierarchies are never natural, that change is always possible if you're brave enough to make it happen. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we're free at last. And we got free not because anyone gave us freedom, but because we took it, with intelligence, with courage, with the absolute refusal to be slaves for one more day. That's the legacy of Magnolia Springs. That's the legacy of Delilah. That's the legacy we carry forward into whatever fights come next. Never stop resisting, never stop fighting, never stop believing that a better world is possible. Because it is. Delilah proved it. And if you found this story powerful, if it moved you, if it made you think differently about slavery and resistance and power, then share it, talk about it, remember it, Because these stories are weapons against forgetting, and forgetting is how oppression maintains itself. What happened at Magnolia Springs happened. What Delilah did matters. And stories like this, uncomfortable and powerful and true, are exactly what we need to remember. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for carrying these stories forward. Now go and resist whatever needs resisting in your own life. You have more power than you know. Delilah proved it.